Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to try and get through this pretty quickly. This is the second go at this. I did one and it lasted half an hour, so I'm going to talk a lot faster when I do this one. Okay, welcome to theory topic E, which is health and safety. So by the end of this unit, you should have a knowledge of the framework related to materials and equipment using the Health and Safety at Work Act, otherwise known as HASSOR. You should be aware of the COSH legislation, Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. You should be aware of the systems that are in place to protect the worker, the user, and the environment that people work in. And you should be aware of what a risk assessment is and how to conduct one. So everything that this topic is about all springs from this thing called the Health and Safety at Work Act, which was passed in 1974. And key phrase in it is employers have a duty to ensure, so far as is reasonably practical, that employees and other visitors are protected at work. And not forgetting, of course, that this is law. It is the law that businesses have to do this. So the key phrase is so far as is reasonably practical. In other words, you don't have to go all out to provide safety. There is a modicum of common sense within the law itself. However, there are two organizations who enforce this. There is the Health and Safety Commission and the Health and Safety Executive. If you think of it, really, the Health and Safety Commission are the guys actually down on the streets, as it were, that do all the proper enforcing and all the investigation, and the HSE, the executive, are the ones that advise the government on what to do. So there's a few key features of the Health and Safety at Work Act. You can pause the video and read through these at length on your right, but essentially it just boils down to these 6 things here. In other words, providing a safe workplace, safe machinery, safe storage of dangerous things, first aid, training for people that work there, and the correct signs that are going to be placed around the workplace. And just want to draw your attention to this phrase at the end here where it talks about personal protective equipment, otherwise known as PPE. The reason for that is that you are all familiar with PPE. You've worn goggles and aprons. Maybe you haven't worn a dust mask when you should have done, and I doubt if any of you have worn ear defenders unless you've been jigsawing a piece of mild steel. But if you do get a question in the exam, it will just relate to it as PPE, and if you do not remember what that stands for, you're going to be stuck. However, key thing to make sure you remember is that it's all about taking reasonable care of your own health and safety and that of others affected by your actions, okay? In other words, you're just as responsible as the people that you work for. Second thing we need to look at is COSH. COSH stands for the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. That could be chemicals, paints, varnishes, dust, fumes, blah blah blah, etc, etc. Lots of things, lots of dangerous substances in the workshop which will be hazardous to your health. In other words, using chemicals will put people at risk, and employers have a duty to make sure that these things are used and stored correctly. If you don't, then you're going to hurt people and you're going to leave yourself open to being sued, taken to court, going to jail. You might have seen some symbols like this on tins of paint and various chemicals, and they're there because COSH says that they have to be there. Now, for us in the workshop, what we're concerned about is substances that are used during work, such as adhesives and paint. Any substances that are created as a result of activities, in other words, fumes. If you were soldering, for example, that's a little bit different to airborne particles, which is dust. Alright, the key thing is, okay, so a hazardous substance at school or in the workplace is either a chemical, a fume, or it's dust, and those things have to be controlled, for they are hazardous substances. There are some more symbols that you might find on containers of chemicals with some descriptions of why they're considered to be dangerous. The reason for this is that even something as simple as a piece of blue tack will have pages and pages of safety data to do with how you should store and keep it and what should happen if somebody sticks it on their skin or eats it. Alright, there are even more pages for more dangerous chemicals. There are some other important health and safety regulations. You need to be vaguely aware of them, but I've never seen a question that has asked them quite specifically. The only one that I'd probably perhaps spend a bit of time on is the last one, RIDOR, to do with reporting of injuries. Again, even if something does happen, the actual reporting of it to various companies like the HSC, that is also a health and safety regulation. If you fail to report an accident, that's just as bad as causing the accident in their eyes. The next clip would have been a rather sort of funny video of the sort of claiming culture that is prevalent in this country nowadays, you know, call claims direct, etc., etc. You can watch the original video on the presentation, and that's totally up to you, but I'm going to skip straight past it because we need to talk about risk assessment. Risk assessment is all about examining what can do harm and deciding whether or not enough precautions have been taken to reduce the chances of that actually happening. Because if you get taken to court, they will keep asking you whether or not you could have done more to prevent that accident from happening. And you have to prove that you did whatever you could to stop that from happening. And you do that by identifying hazards and assessing the risks. So a hazard is anything that could be classed as that could cause you harm. That would involve things like working at height, on a ladder, using machinery like a pillar drill or a bandsaw, but also working with electricity if you're wiring up a building. So for example, we've got a fairly standard workshop here. Just pause the video now and see if you can identify a few things that are wrong with it, things that might cause a hazard. Okay, so hopefully you should have spotted a few things straight out the gate. I can see obviously there's lots of debris on the floor, tripping hazards. There's an open container of glue left on the circular saw. There are even tools left on the circular saw. The saw itself is completely exposed. Even though the guard is on, it's quite high and it's not protecting you from the blade in any way. There are some PPE equipment. There's some ear defenders on the side, but to be honest, if they've been in that environment covered in dust, I wouldn't want to put them anywhere near my ears. So once you've identified hazards, you then need to identify something called risk. And the risk is the chance that someone could be harmed by a particular hazard. So once you've spotted something that could hurt you, you have to determine, well, what are the chances that someone could actually get hurt by that, and you classify them into high, medium or low risks. So for example, if you bang your leg on a vise, that's likely to happen, but it's not that serious. So you might say there that in terms of a risk, that would be classed as low, whereas cutting your hand on the bandsaw could happen and it would be serious if it happened. However, we have things in place to hopefully stop that, so perhaps the risk may be medium. Alright, certain things, certain tools may be classed as a high risk, but hopefully if you've taken steps to reduce all those things, then you should be fine to do them. There will always be an element of risk in a school workshop. That's the nature of the subject. However, if there's anything really still classed as a high risk, then you wouldn't do it. That might be doing some some of the stuff that either me or the technician has to do for you because it is a high risk. So we can't figure out a way of actually reducing the risk without us doing it ourselves. Now, if we were in the workshop, I would have done a nice little experiment with you to identify hazards and risks by getting you to place those stars around. All you need to do from this video is just try and imagine you're in the workshop. Where would you put those high risk stars, or the low risk? Low risk might be on cables that are left lying around. Medium risk might be on all the machines like the sander, the fret saws, the band saws. Maybe the bandsaw might be classed as a high risk. The circular saw could definitely be a high risk because you're never allowed to use that. Okay, so just get used to looking around the workshop and trying to assess things that might do you harm, but also combine that with the chances of that actually happening. Okay, so 5 steps to carry out an official risk assessment. You've already done a couple of them. Okay, so you've identified the hazards. The next stage then, as we said, identify who might be harmed and the exact nature of that harm. Yeah, who will get hurt, how will they get hurt. Then evaluate that risk and decide on how you will reduce the risk by putting in place certain control measures. Those control measures might be things like training, signs, guards, okay, anything like that. An important aspect of risk assessment is that you need to record everything that you do. So the risk assessment is published, it's filed away somewhere, and there will be a period of review. Very often that's a year, and you would then come back to that and assess whether or not everything's still the same, and then you'd set it again for another year. Most risk assessments would just carry through like that, but it might be that there's something else in place, something that's come about which might help you to reduce the risk even further. So let's quickly try it now. Okay, so you could print this off from the main sort of documents that are attached to all this. So imagine you were cutting a hole in a piece of plywood. The tools and equipment required would be, that's right, a pillar drill and some drill bits, maybe a piece of wood, but that's not really a tool or equipment. Try and think of 4 things that could happen. Just pause the video for a second now, have a think, and see whether or not you've got the same thing as me. Okay, thanks for pausing. Hopefully you could have identified these 4 things: that the work could spin and damage the hand, material could fly off and get into your eyes, the chuck key might have been left in, that would fly off and injure you, and lastly, any loose items of clothing could become entangled, but that could also include hair. One of the things you wouldn't have on here, which is often I see from students, is they say you drill a hole in your hand. It's actually quite difficult to drill a hole entirely through your hand. Yes, you could cut yourself, alright, but yeah, unless you just keep going and keep going, you're not going to end up drilling through your hand. Okay, take a few more seconds now and look at those 4 hazards and try and identify what 4 things you would do to prevent them. Pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you should have identified these. Alright, to stop work from spinning, you need to hold it firmly. That would only come about because you've been shown how to do that. You would have been trained. Or you might have been shown how to use some sort of clamping device or a machine vise, something like that. But a lot of that needs to be shown. You need to be trained how to use a tool or a machine. You should never ever use one if you haven't been shown how to use it. Secondly, goggles. The most important part of your body is your eyes. You lose an eye, that's it, it's game over. So make sure if you're doing anything on machinery you wear a pair of goggles. Third, that's going to come down to training, but you've also got to make sure that any guards that are on the machines are in place. They're like a second backup. They usually prevent you from either getting your fingers or from stopping things from flying off into your eyes in the first place. And last of all, any sort of loose items of clothing, bracelets, things like that, either tie them back, get rid of them, tuck them in. Just make sure that nothing is going to get caught in that machine. And what do you do if it happens? Right. First thing you do is, if it's a powered bit of machinery, you must turn it off. Okay, there's 2 ways you can do that. If you're on the machine yourself, then on our pillar drill we have a little foot place at the bottom which you just kick, and that just turns the machine off. It should only be used though in emergencies. You should not be doing that as a matter of course for turning it off, because you're going to damage it, and the one time that you might need to use it might be the time that doesn't actually work. There are also emergency stop buttons around the workshop, those big yellow boxes with the red buttons on. You turn them on, turn them off, and you will activate a system-wide thing, and it will turn the power off in the whole workshop. Once you've done that, tell your teacher, or tell an adult if there's there should be a teacher in the room, but make sure you tell the teacher that something's happened, and they might have to apply first aid, or they may have to untangle you from the machine or something like that. In the 15 years that I've been there, nobody's got anything caught in a drill as yet, touch wood. Okay, now once again, in the document that's been uploaded to Edmodo, there is an extension if you want to try and do a few risk assessments yourself. I definitely recommend you have a go at them. 2 activities you might do might be cutting card with a craft knife and using one of our hot glue guns. Strangely enough, those are the 2 perhaps most dangerous machines in DT. They are the 2 things which cause the most accidents, with children either cutting their fingers or burning their fingers on the glue guns. In the 15 years that I've been there, 1 person has cut their finger on a bandsaw, whereas somebody cuts their finger or burns themselves on a glue gun every single year, probably every single term. This last picture is just there just to remind you that a lot of health and safety is down to common sense. There are laws there to punish those people who don't adhere to them, but a lot of health and safety is down to common sense. And the last thing would be a little video. Again, you probably have to watch the original. I'm not going to show it on here, but this video shows quite a few examples of what can happen when you don't adhere to health and safety. And especially in a country like ours, we're very hot on health and safety, whereas in quite a lot of countries, in a lot of developing countries, their attitude to health and safety is somewhat lax, as you may see in some of these examples. That's not their fault. That's probably a fault of the regulations and stuff in place. They won't have a Health and Safety at Work Act like we've got. Very often it might be down to a case of, let's say, stupidity, because they're rushing things, where this all comes down to common sense. Okay, but there's lots of these that you can watch, and if you download the original presentation, you can watch these to your heart's content. To finish, as I said at the start, the key thing is if you get a question about health and safety, then use that correct technical language that we said at the start. So mention things like the Health and Safety at Work Act, mention words like COSH and risk assessment, personal protective equipment, PPE. Those are the words which should immediately spring to your mind if you get a question that's based on health and safety. Okay, and to finish this assignment off, please go along to Edmodo and complete the quiz. Okay, just short answers, 20 minutes. Thank you very much. Bye.